So Jiva, we've looked at the tool set, or taken a brief look at the tool set. We've seen where the language comes from. We've built run. We've understood this compiling process and linking process, or what we need to understand of it. And we've actually run the program from the command line to show that that's what it was. But we've not actually even looked at any code yet, or done that. So I guess it's time to let people sort of see or write their first program.
Absolutely. So let's take that project that we created before, and let's take a look at the source code that actually generated for us from the template. Now, for the purposes of this particular example, I'm actually going to go in here into this source code, and I'm going to take out a couple of these lines because they're not really instructional at this point. They will only confuse people if we look at them right now.
They're in the way. Get rid of them.
Exactly. So we're going to take them out, and that is the this line here where we're doing this stuff with the NS auto release pool. Going to take that all together and the pool drain. Okay.
That's a 50% smaller program.
This is the bare minimum that you need to actually do anything in Objective-C right here.
Okay. Right.
Okay? So the first thing to know about this program, and any program written in Objective-C, is all the source code is made up essentially of statements and expressions. A statement is something where you're actually telling the compiler to go do something. It doesn't necessarily have to return any value. An expression, on the other hand, always returns a value.
Okay.
Now, for the most part, the difference between those two is so minuscule that it's not really important. That you're not going to be sitting here writing source code and thinking to yourself, okay, I need to use this statement or this expression. You're just going to be writing source code.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't really need to know that unless you're going to be going and taking a computer science class or something and need to pass an exam.
If you're relying on us to pass your computer science exam, you've probably got it wrong.
Precisely. So let's take a look at all of the statements that are used to make up this particular program. So the first one here is actually this pound import statement. Now this is actually a preprocessor command. Remember I talked about the preprocessor and how it takes your source code and it expands any of the preprocessor commands inline in your source code and then creates the preprocessed source file. Well, that's exactly what this import statement does, is it actually goes and it finds the file that's given in the angle brackets there, which in this case is the foundation.h header file, which we'll talk about later. And it actually expands that file and puts it right into your source code. So if you went and looked at the source code after it was preprocessed, you'd see the whole foundation.h file right there.
Right, okay, so it's dragging it in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Interestingly, that pound sign on the beginning of it actually indicates that it is a preprocessor macro. And that's something that we'll talk about when we talk specifically about the preprocessor and preprocessor commands. So that's the first thing there. As you add other statements, as you add other commands to your programs, you'll add additional import statements in there for those commands to import the framework code for those commands.
Okay.
So now, next, I'm actually going to skip over the main function here because we'll talk about that in just a minute. I wanted to actually talk about the stuff inside the main function. Now, I will say one thing about the main function, that is all Objective-C programs have a main function, and essentially that's where your program starts and where it ends. So when you enter the main function, you begin executing all of the statements inside of that main function. And then when you exit the main function, your program terminates.
So our life of our program is between the start and the end of the main function.
Correct.
And the start and end is defined by those curly braces.
Exactly, by the curly braces.
Okay.
And again, we'll talk a little bit about curly braces in a minute when we talk about scope and things like that. Now, each of these lines inside of the main function, again, each one of them is a statement. This first one is actually a comment. You can put comments anywhere in your code, and that's indicated by the 2 slashes on the beginning of the line. Now, there's 2 different kinds of comments in Objective-C. The first one is this with the double slashes. That indicates that everything on that line to the end of the line is a comment.
From the slashes to the end of the line.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, if you wanted to put in multiple lines of comments, for example, if I wanted to come in here and take this line and spread it over 2 lines, then sometimes programmers will use a syntax of comment with /*. Now, when they do that, they have to also indicate the end of that comment because it's on multiple lines, right? So they have to indicate the end of that comment by also putting an asterisk / on the other end of that comment.
Okay, makes sense, yep.
For the most part, most programmers using Objective-C, though, like to use the / style of comments. It's kind of considered the more modern form of comments, I think.
We don't want to be using out-of-date comments, do we?
Yeah. Now, the purpose of a comment, the important thing to know about comments is that anything that you put into a comment does nothing. It's strictly there for the purposes of sort of putting notes in your code, like in this particular case, right? This is from the template, and it's saying insert code here. It's a note to you to add your code, whatever you want to put, right there. You can also use it, for example, if you wanted to take a particular portion of code and take it out temporarily. You can comment it out, and then that code will just not even compile. It won't do anything.
So during that phase, if it just gets ignored,
right,
it never ends up anywhere.
Right. Remember we talked again, going back to the preprocessor, right? The preprocessor will take that import statement and it'll expand it, but it'll also go through and take all of your comments and actually remove them completely. So they're not even in the final preprocessed source code. Now the next line here is an NSLog statement. Now this is actually calling another function. Again, we'll talk about functions in a minute, but that actually causes the program to print the words "Hello World" to the console.
Okay.
Now, this shows a statement with a semicolon on it. All statements in an Objective-C application, with the exception of preprocessor macros and certain control statements and so forth, require a semicolon on the end of them to indicate the end of the statement.
Okay.
Now, the semicolon actually, as I said, it actually indicates the end of the statement. So, for example, in this particular case, we actually have two statements here. There's the NSLog statement that's going to print that stuff out, and that ends with a semicolon. And then right underneath it, we have this return 0 statement. Now, you might look at this and you might say, okay, I have to have the NSLog, and then I have to have the return 0, and I have to have them on the separate lines and so forth. That's actually all just for your purposes, for making it more readable for you. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, programmers tend to spend tons of time debating what the right way to format their code is. Yeah. And it's really all very subjective. The compiler doesn't care. What the compiler cares about is that each statement is terminated with a semicolon. So I could, for example, take this return statement here, and I could actually bring it up here like this and put it one right after another, and the compiler totally wouldn't care. It would consider those still two statements because each one is terminated with a semicolon on the end.
So basically the compiler just ignores white space.
Yes, exactly.
The white space is there for our own pleasure.
Precisely.
And to argue over.
Right, which we do. Yeah. Now, another thing that programmers love to argue about is these other couple of characters here, these curly braces. Now, curly braces allow you to indicate scope in your program. So the curly braces that are shown here, like this one up here, indicates the scope of the main function. Now, I said earlier that I was going to talk a little bit more about the main function. Essentially, a function is like a subroutine inside of your application. Mm-hmm. So there's the NSLog function here, and in this particular case, there's this main function. Now, the main function, the scope of the main function, that is all of the commands that are going to be executed for the main function, are inside the curly braces here and at the end of it. And so that indicates all of the code that makes up the main function. So when you call main, that's the stuff that gets executed. Okay. Similarly, NSLog, for example, has code associated with it. And when you call that NSLog statement, it goes and finds that subroutine and executes all of the statements in there. So that's pretty much everything that is in this particular application. And this is like I said, the bare minimum that you can have to actually print something on the screen. NSLog, output stuff, done.
So So we see what's going on. We've looked at that code, but I get, there's lots of other things going on in details that we need to look at that I guess when we come back, we'll start breaking them down into little sections,
right,
dealing with a bunch of stuff.
Right. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be variables.
Variables. When we're going to see what they are, where to declare them, how to do them, Objective-C style. Back in a moment.